I see trees of green.
This whole idea of thinning and pruning, it does create an interesting aesthetic that is appealing to many people. So a parkland type aesthetic. Some people are going to prefer a more native forest type of aesthetic. So this isn't what everybody wants. So again, it ties back to your objective. You know, what is your objective? Do you want to replicate a native forest, an ecosystem, or look? Well, you're not necessarily going to do this. Okay, there's different silviculture that you would employ. So it seems like you guys, you've learned a bit about base area. You know that it's the cross-sectional area. So it's a per hectare measurement, so it's a standard measurement, and that's very important. It doesn't have as much, you can do it for a single tree, but it doesn't really have the same power or meaning because it's simply put, it's an index of competition. You know, so you add all these cross-sectional areas up per hectare. If you're getting around that half that diameter level, so let's say these trees are 30 centimetres in diameter roughly at breast height, and the base area is at 15, and they're eucalypts, okay, the standard sort of, you know, your blue gum, spider gum, sugar gum, these sorts of species, red iron bark, we can assume that they're entering competition with one another. And we're going to get some tail-offs in diameter growth, all right, and potentially health. So someone come up to me and was showing me some photos early in their break, and they showed me they've got basket lurk infestations and in their eucalypts there's some other things going on too. Sometimes, you know, that happens. But by managing to keep your trees healthy, perhaps you do that by having a more biodiverse environment. Perhaps you do that through pruning and thinning to reduce competition. Those infestations won't cause you as many issues. So there's different ways to thin. Now this stand here, that's actually the basal area. Look at all the dead branches, see? Only get live branches way up there, so probably halfway up the tree. So there, the basal area, again, let's say they're 20 centimetre trees, the basal area is going to be around 20 in there, okay? And if you're looking to maximise timber production for like a pulpwood plantation or something, that's probably at the stage where you'd be looking at harvesting, just completely clear falling. But if you want to do this, you wanted to thin that 5 years before, because you're losing that free growth. Yeah, okay? Alright. Thinning can be done several ways. Now, this is a thin to waste, so what happens there is the trees are just simply, looks like it's probably 40-50% of the trees are thinned in every second row, and then they just naturally break down and you've actually got access in your remaining rows, the other every second row. What is starting to happen a little bit more now is that you can look at mulch thinning options too, so you don't need to worry about this, or indeed you run a big mulcher over top of this stuff and accelerate that breakdown. And therefore you've got those advantages we talked about, so fire risk is obviously reduced, you're actually putting fantastic litter inputs in there, accelerating that whole process, which has great benefits for your trees. There's other ways to thin too. So this guy's name's Bill Kerriush. He developed this system when he was working with Cyro many years ago. They call it it's like a basal bark type treatment where he hits the tree, squirts a little bit of herbicide in and kills the tree, mimics that self-thinning process, just accelerating. There's other ways to do it too. There's a thing called a tree spear, which you actually hold like this and you put it at the base of the tree. Does the same sort of thing. Yeah, those systems are interesting. They were very popular a few years ago. Probably not quite as they've got a place. But what you've got to be very careful of with those type of systems is something called flashback. Particularly when your plantation is really competing, you start getting roots becoming, getting very close to one another, and in some places actually they're in community with one another, so they're connected. So if you put herbicide in the one tree, and this is where it comes down to species selection and how different species perform, actually kill an unintended tree. Now, some species there's really very little issue with that, but in other species there is significant issues. Yeah, so that's something to be very, very careful of in that regard. Very careful of. Yeah, 2 questions, yep.
In regards to the mulch that's a big job, is there an alternative to putting a industrial mulcher through this picture here?
Yep.
Like to let it naturally just break down? And how long does that take?
Yeah, no, that's the way it's probably always been done. It's only the last few years where people started mulching it in.
Yeah.
So what you find is, to answer the question about length of time, so like I'd suggest this has probably been thinned a couple of weeks before that photo.
Yeah.
So that, it's going to look pretty, like what will happen is within a few months all the leaves will fall off.
That's right.
So they'll, and in terms of nutrient dense parts of the tree, it's your leaf, your small branches and your bark, very, very nutrient dense. So that tends to, your leaves fall off, bark will fall off later after that, then you've got your small twigs will break down. But the actual stem, and I'm assuming they're probably like this, starting at this or maybe a bit bigger going down, it's going to take years.
Yeah, that's quite big, which leads me to a question about thinning and pruning. Is it not best just to do it more regularly so that those branches are smaller and more able to, like they're easier to break down, easier to prune, like a smaller branch is easier to prune than a bigger one?
Oh yeah, you can take over the whole lecture if you like, because you're right on. I mean, yeah, so there's this hectare scale side of things where, because it's quite a lot of work and you probably can't get to it yourself, where you actually prune, you do lift pruning and you do it hectares at a time. But if you've got smaller areas, or indeed you've actually got the time resources, labour resources available to you, you might do things called variable lift pruning, which is more about pruning to a diameter. And so you might prune some species to here, you prune some other species, that same species higher.
Yeah.
It's all to do with tree size, and there's wonderful benefits. The smaller the branch, I mean, you just look at these, right?
Yeah.
So these things, these are pretty heavy, and they can take about 60 mil branch. Do you want to be doing a 60 mil branch today? No.
Chainsaws, like the little mini ones, are really easy to make.
Yeah. So with chainsaws are interesting because you've got very little margin for error. Even those little ones, which are way better.
If you need the ambient.
Yeah, we'll talk about that in a jiff. The risk associated with using chainsaws and pruning. For my work, I get a lot of subbies in to help me with different sorts of pruning. I say no chainsaws. If you're going to work on my site, no chainsaws. Because the actual one, there might be a guy that's very, very proficient, but I can guarantee you the whole crew won't be. It's just a disaster waiting to happen. Whereas with these, and guys that do this a lot, they're quite good at it, and even with these you can get issues. But smaller branches are good, but that doesn't necessarily always come down to timing. And genetics man out the back, well, he'll tell you that it can be due with genetics of the tree as well, the way it's planted, how tightly the spaced they are, the species. So if you were to look at red ironbark, for example, oh mate, you don't prune that thing on time, and even if you do, it's a really tough job. Whereas you compare that to, say, a spotted gum, yellow stringy bark, those sort of species, they're just a piece of cake to prune. Yeah. Yes.
Sorry, one more. Is there any sort of practice in place where people will, when you thin with certain species, you then regrow a tree from that, so you can turn around, your forests more regularly?
Yeah. So coppicing. Yeah. So there's actually the way forests. One of the big ways forests used to be managed. So I'll use the wombat forest for example. Does anyone know where the wombat forest is? Yep. So. The wombat forest is actually not far from where I did my forestry degree. So the middle 2 years of that degree were at Creswick. And we had a demonstration forest near there. And the way that demonstration forest used to be managed was, they call it, I think they almost call it a coppice with standard system. So because the trees there, they work really hard to keep the species composition roughly the same. A clear felling method in that particular plant, in that particular native forest, it could work, but it didn't have to be done that way, because you get very good regen results by taking out what they call gap selections or single tree selection harvesting, or where you'd actually take one tree and leave the others around it. So you might take an inferior tree, improving the quality of that forest all the time. But what happens is, that tree coppices. So for example, stringy bark simple coppices, red ironbark, sensational coppicing tree. Spotted gum's another one that coppices beautifully. So, but there's complexity with that management. And we don't need to be afraid of complexity. A lot of people seem to be afraid of complexity with trees. If you just want something nice and simple, and that's your objective, you just want to, you don't want that complexity, well, you're probably going to end up looking at a single species that grows nice and quick. Most likely it's going to be pretty low value wood, and silviculturally, it's a bit of a recipe site. Pine, for example, really easy. It grows anywhere. It's very adaptive physiologically and silviculturally. So it's a really good thing to plant in some place in somebody's eyes. But if you do this coppice method, what happens to that coppice? So let's say, you're intervening in that plantation, you're doing silvicultural management there every 6-7 years, which is probably what you do. Or if you've got a big area, you're in there every year, but you only come back to that spot 7 or 8 years later. 7 or 8 years later, that coppice is probably going to be, might be 10 metres tall. But you want to knock another tree over. Then you've got to say, oh no, I can't hit that coppice, that one over there. I've got these other really big trees I want to maintain and harvest in 20 years' time. So it does create some harvesting issues, bit of complexity, but if you think about it, it's actually, you're flexible. It's not that hard. You directionally forward where it's not going to damage something else and where you can pull it out. So, yeah, absolutely, which means you're not having to plant another tree, you've actually got crops moving on. I've seen people do it, funnily enough, not with coppicing, but with pine wildlings. So they actually they selectively thin their pines, but they let the wildlings come up, and they're never planting new trees. They're actually just running it through that way, which is really interesting, and actually, because they're prepared to think outside the square a little bit, they're doing really well. So thinning products, this is really good to talk about. The conventional way of planting trees for timber has been planted at a tight spacing. You're doing that because you want to have a selection differential. You want to be able to select the best trees, because trees aren't like wheat. We haven't done a lot of breeding in most of them. There's been some breeding done in pine, blue gum, shining gum, a little bit of spotted gum. There's not a lot of improved seed sources out there for most eucalypts. So you plant a lot, you get stands that come up like this that are looking really nice, but dealing with small piece size is, most people say, look, it's just not economic, because our Australian forest industry, it typically revolves around big machinery, big areas. We're harvesting, and we get our forestry companies make their money out of big areas, big machinery with big throughput, and bigger, reasonable sized trees. As soon as we start trying to do this sort of stuff, again, it's complex, it's challenging, we're going backwards. An example would be the group I used to work for, so Heartwood Plantations, have worked really, really hard to develop a firewood market for their plantations. They've got these plantations, they've done a non-commercial thinning, a lot of them sitting around 300 to 500 stems a hectare, but they're locking up, they're reaching this stage where they're not growing anymore. Do we do another commercial thin, which is just going to a non-commercial thin, which is just going to cost money, or do we try to get firewood product or post product out of those plantations, because the wood in them is actually good for that. But then you've got all this complexity about damaging existing stems. You're trying to do it with big machinery. In Australia, where you used to get receiving lots of money for the work you do, wages are quite high for this sort of stuff. So it creates these issues where, yeah, I can get, let's say, $10 a tonne for my wood, like as a stumpage payment. So that's what you get after everything. So I'll go back a step. You look at this and you say, oh, firewood's valuable. There's not much of it around anymore. It should be worth a jolly fortune. You get someone in to give you a quote, and they'll say, we'll take it off your hands, but it's going to cost the harvester $100 a tonne to do it. We're only getting $80. We're getting $105 for the wood. So it will give you the $5 that's left over if you're lucky. There'll be some sort of management charge or something, on top of that as well. So you're dealing with it becomes difficult, becomes not profitable. But does it have to be that way? Why do we have to plant trees at 1,000 cents plus per hectare anyway?
Genetic variability.
Genetic variability. Yeah, absolutely. So if your focus is timber, if you just wanted to grow timber, and I realise it's got obviously a real timber wood focus today, but some of these principles can be applied elsewhere. If it's just timber, well, you probably are going to look at something like this, because that's how you grow really good timber from non-improved seed sources. But if your actual focus is actually, I really like the idea of having a few sheep and a few cattle wander around the trees, and I've seen that multi-story farming picture up before. I really like that. You don't have to plant your trees at this. So you might plant your trees at 200 or 300 stems per hectare. But there's some species you're not going to go near. You can't plant mountain ash. You can't plant alpine ash. You're thinking pretty closely about whether you can plant messmate or not. But something like spotted gum or something with good natural form like a redwood or these sorts of things might well lend themselves to that sort of system. So you actually don't have to worry about this at all being profitable, because you're getting returns from the grazing area in between, and you're still able to grow those big fat logs as well. Or you might say, you know what, I want to do this, I want to get firewood and these sorts of things out, but if I use an improved seed source, which exists for something like red ironbark and spotted gum, I could probably slip it back to 600 stems a hectare. And all of a sudden my harvesting gets easier, the piece size is bigger, the trees don't come into competition as early. You can see you're not having this trouble about trying to do this and not be profitable. So think very carefully about your design before you put your trees in. So getting back to hardwood plantations, they have quite successfully actually developed the firewood market. They're thinning their own stands. You know what, the only way they're making it profitable is by handling the marketing at the other end. Like they're doing everything themselves, and so they're actually selling, it's a premium product. So they're actually receiving in the order of, I'm guessing a bit here, but over $500 a tonne for that wood. Maybe $700, $800 a tonne for that wood. Whereas and they're actually bagging it as well, they're doing that bagging, and if they bag it, they can sell it for over $1,000 a tonne, much like what you do at the surveys. So because they're putting extra effort into all that marketing, they're able to make this work. But it's pretty hard work. To do that, they've had to spend $100 grand plus to gear themselves up, to actually get themselves in that position. So it's heavily mechanised, to get over those labour issues I was telling you about. So, pruning, I'll race through this. To make the most of the spacing advantage you've created with thinning, what that creates, you're getting more light, which means that your branches will grow bigger and fatter. So, in order to grow this clear wood, you need to prune. Now, clear wood is valuable because it's got no knots. And that's really the number one defect in wood for a sawmill, it's knots. So here we go. So there's the stand before anything's done, pruned and thinned at the same time. Okay, that's pruned at 2.4 metres roughly. So the way this works is there's your branches, there's your pith. We knock the branches off and the wood grows over the stub. Alright, so to do that, to have that happen that clean though, you can actually see here there's a little bit of rot coming there, a little bit of gum formation. You did get a bit of that, but that's hot. You can see this wood out here. That's very acceptable. The diameter from here to here is called DOS, or diameter over stubs, you'll often refer it to, and you want to keep that below 15 centimetres. There we go. So there's an example of some more. Now this is talking about how you cut. A lot of people fall into the trap of cutting parallel to the stem. You don't do, why wouldn't you do that? Yeah, you got a bigger wound, but most importantly, most significantly, you're actually going to disrupt the flow of sugars around that wound. Because you remember where the sugars run? Just under the bark, so that cambium. So the good photo talks about this in a minute. So how to prune a branch, this on a, looks like a pine. You cut it at that angle. See there, and it's a similar thing for eucalypts. But see this is called the branch collar. You like that's where the new cells come from to heal the wound. So if you damage that collar, it's going to take longer. Gives borer insects more of a chance to get in. There we go. That's topical. And that's, if you do that, that's how it'll occlude. It'll occlude over pretty well. That's a flush cut. That's going to take longer to occlude over than that one. Here's the flow of sugars. That's where the sugars are flowing. If you do a flush cut, look what's happening. You know, it's not ring barking a tree, but you know, that's how ring barking works, isn't it? So you're actually interrupting that flow. And what you tend to find is the flow of sugars is pretty longitudinal. It'll the way that wood is structured is that if you disrupt that flow there, it actually will disrupt it for the rest of down a tree, maybe that much. Depends on the species. But it's considerable. So that means that the roots that are coming off that part of the wood right down, they're not getting the sugars either. So you can see that it would influence the productivity or the growth of that tree. Very, very important. Pruning's hard enough. Don't prune trees that are never going to amount to anything. I see this commonly, where people have planted a lot of trees, they have 800 stems a hectare, they first prune the whole lot. You know, it's taken them 3 times as long as it should. They shouldn't be pruning that many because you're never going to have 800 stems per hectare produce 50 centimetre, 60 centimetre logs. It's going to be more like your 100, 150. There's several different ways to prune. Often if you prune too heavily, you can get these things called epicormic shoots, which are simply just an attempt by the tree to recover the crown that it's lost. It's an injury response. There's mountain ash, alpine ash do it very regularly. Silvertop ash does as well. The main method to stop that happening is not to prune too heavily. So never take any more than half your crown off at one time. What density do you start at? You can, if wood production is your prime objective, you're probably going to start at a slightly higher spacing. If you're interested in a combination of wood and agriculture, you're probably going to start at a lower spacing. If time and labour resources are a real issue for you, and you don't have like a marketing bent, you probably want to consider a lower type spacing as well. Then you don't have to be concerned and be spending a lot of money on getting rid of that small diameter material. Just some things to think about. Establishment. There is this establishment here that's been, this is a case of, please don't reinvent the wheel with this one, I think you've got to. Establishment trials have been done to death. There are literally, I won't say hundreds, but there is tens of these things around. This one's in Gippsland, where they have done it really, really well. They've cultivated soil, and then they've not put any fertiliser on, but they've done weed control. They've just got single weed controlled strips. They've got single fertiliser strips. They've got planting with nothing. Look, the bottom line is, in terms of your establishment, the most important thing is what? In terms of the treatment?
Weed control.
Weed control. By far and away the most important thing. The second most important thing in my view, and some people might disagree with me here, is nutrition. In fact, I'd put nutrition's right up there with weed control for me. Some people would say, yeah, but I haven't done anything with my nutrition, I just stick with weed control. And my trees are 3 metres tall after 12 months. Yeah, that happens a lot with a fast-growing tree. But my question to them would be, what's going to happen 10 years from now? You know, forestry is a long-term enterprise. The trees need to be able to access the minerals they need, not only for the first year or two, maybe 30 years. So you need to keep that in mind at the start as well. So there's a lot of things you think about. The other thing, okay, I'll keep going. So soil investigations, I've written up there, high priority. Not many people do this. There's there's companies out there that think this is way overkill. And it's probably because I don't claim to understand. I'm no soil scientist, but please don't underestimate what's going on below the ground. I've been involved with planting millions of trees and helped set up thousands of hectares of plantations. And if you don't do this, keeping in mind it's a long-term thing, you may as well cut off both your legs and try to walk. It is really, really tough because you don't know how deep your soil is. You don't know. This here, for example, this was just done in December last year on a site that I'm working on near Yea. That was not at Yea, that was in Gippsland. This was done in Yea, right? We did soil cores there. We did soil cores because it's very important for that particular client to get an idea of how much carbon is in their soil. So we're killing two birds with one stone. We're using this soil core, which goes down to 1.4, 1.5 metres. We're complying with the carbon, the powers that be methods for assessing soil carbon. So these people can potentially trade sometime down the track. But we're actually getting a fantastic look at the profile. So you can see up there, right at the top, we've probably got about 100 mil of topsoil, and it's grey. Grey soil tells me that there's drainage issues. You can tell that straight away. Look at this. That tells me that's invaluable. It tells me that if the topsoil is exposed, I'm going to have an erosion issue. Because this soil here has got really poor structure. Yep. If we actually, if we get in there real aggressive with ripping and mounding, for example, and we control the whole site, which I don't because you don't have to. We're going to expose topsoil, and you're going to have massive erosion issues, which no one wants. Eroded ground's not photosynthesising, it's just costing you money. Then you get down into this stuff. See, there's a bit of red through here. A little bit of red is actually mottling in that soil. So I know that I've got waterlogging at depth. This actually comes in, it's called a gradational clay, this soil. So I get down to here, that's where the rock is. That's as far as we went because of the rock. So I know I've got 1.4 metres of soil, which tells me so much. It tells me that I'm never going to plant bluey gum on that site. Even with the best silvicultural management, that plantation's going to really suffer on that site. It's going to be very difficult. It's not going to give me the wood that a sugar gum or a red ironbark plantation would give me, simply because those two species are adapted to survive on gradational clay, even heavy clay soils that aren't that deep. If this soil had finished here at 90 centimetres, I'd be saying to them, we can't plant timber plantation here. Like one of their objectives is to make money out of timber. We're not planting a timber plantation there, and that's what's happened. So on this site, it's a 60 hectare site, and 15 hectares of the soil's just too shallow. So I've got 40, so when I'm actually, let's just run this through, right? I've got 60 hectares net area. I don't do the soil investigation. We go out, we order 60,000 trees, 1,000 a hectare. We do all the work on 60 hectares. Trees get to 10 years of age, what happens? We plant blue gum, probably at 6 years, a quarter of my site dies. We've spent 15 hectares of extra money we never should have spent. I'm not saying don't plant trees on those less than a metre. So what this tells us is that we've actually got 45 hectares that we could consider for a more conventional sort of timber plantation, but we've got 15 hectares. Why don't we consider something that doesn't need, maybe we can look at firewood there. Maybe we know that we can't support a lot of wood, so why don't we go, let's plant trees wider, fence it off, and put your cattle in there when it's really rough conditions and they've got some really good shelter. It's just giving us the information to plan out a site holistically. If you don't do it, you'll have that hot feeling I talked about before. Walk out across your hill, 1 year after 2 years of drought, it's like, oh no, what have I done? You ring someone like me up and say, what can we do? The trees are dead. I'm sorry, there's not much you can do. They're dead. You better buy some more cattle and graze some more, but I don't like cattle. It's really, so please do that. Soil cores are more expensive than getting an excavator or a backhoe in, but you still get the same info. So you dig down, OH&S is very important here, so you can see this is benched off. That goes down to 3 metres, different soil, more productive site. And because that's 3 metres, I can all of a sudden look at species that are heavily demanding and need lots of water, lots of mineral to grow well. So we can just about grow anything there. On this site though, we're eliminating a lot of things, but that's okay. You can still do a very worthwhile project on that site. And at Tony's, you would have seen that as you went up the hill, the species changed, didn't they? We had blue gum on the flat and deep soils on the flat, 3 metres plus on the flat. But as soon as we got up on those rises, we'd only get up 100, 150 metres, and then our soil turned less than a metre, and we looked at firewood species above that, and even in some of those places, they've died. So you've got on Tony's side, I've got to say this. So another thing to look at with planting, have you got southern aspects or northern aspects? If you've got northern aspects in shallow soils, your trees are going to be starved of moisture pretty quickly, way before the southern side. And at Tony's, you can see this really good example where red ironbark on the north side has just died. It's died at age 10, 12. And red ironbark's as tough as old boots. It's really tough. But on the south side, same elevation, it's as happy as Larry. No problem at all. Yeah.
Question. What might have already been spoken about, but talking about economy of scale, what is the minimum size that is worth actually venturing into? Like minimum land size. You've got a property, you might have bought it, you haven't done a soil type. Like at 47 could have been the opposite. 40, could be the 47 was not viable, but 15 was. So, what size depends on what your tree is, but forestry.
Well, yeah. So I'll answer that making some assumptions. So I'm assuming that your objective.
Understanding the objectives could be about, just say tree forest, like sawmill.
Okay, so you want to grow wood. You want to grow wood that you can send to a sawmill. Yep. So you're going to end up, if you want to do that, you'll typically, and this is typically, there's always little exceptions that people could pull me up on here, but you're going to need to grow a certain volume to bring the contractors in.
Correct.
Yeah. So typically what people would say, and this is really, at any thinning, you want to be generating at least 500 tonne to bring a reputable sort of contractor in.
Unless you co-share with the neighbour.
Unless you co-share with a neighbour, that's right. More like some people would say, look, I'm not coming there unless you've got 1,000. You know, it really depends on their approach, what sort of, what sort of gear they've got. So to do that, to translate that back, you're probably saying minimum 10 hectares. And what I've done at home, I'm not going to have, over time, I'll probably have 1,000 that could be removed in any one thinning, but I'm not interested in removing with any one thinning. I'm just taking out trees as they mature, and they'll be milled, a lot of them are milled on site, or I'm very fortunate, got a number of mates with heavy machinery close by. I'll actually pull 6 trees, enough to fill a truck, take it to my mate's mill.
Yeah.
So it's a totally different scale. To be able to do that, you might have a hectare.
That, I guess, is what we're more looking at that model than the commercial contractors coming in, having a community where, there is a mill nearby, there is, that option of employing your own earth contractors.
Yes, yeah. So you can see there's a lot of things that come into that.
Could I have a question on that?
Yeah.
Approximately, how many test sites do you desire to have per hectare?
Oh, great question.
And the second is, what's the comparable cost of the methods?
Yeah, okay. I'll answer the first one. That is double the cost of that. Does that help? So you're looking, so this is done on I've done it on a smaller size too. So let's say it's a 20 hectare site. It's a 20 hectare site, and you've got the same 20 hectare site with this. I'd suggest to you that would be double the cost, but mainly because there's a report attached to that, a soil carbon report. So that's quite expensive to produce. If you're just simply getting cores, I reckon the cost would be probably fairly similar. To answer that question, if you've got a flat site, just completely flat, 10 hectares, you might only need 1 or 2 of these investigation sites. This site at Yea, it's got a ridge going through it, it's got flats near a creek, and flats on the other side of the hill. So I know it's got 2 soil types. It's probably got another 3 or 4 subsoil types, and you've got 3 different aspects. So we did 20 cores on that site over 45 hectares. So about 1 every 2 or 3 hectares. It's very site specific. Tony's, that Canberra site that you've been to, would have done close to 20 there too, I reckon. But on this site, this is a 6 hectare site, much smaller. We've done 5 pits on that site. I've done a 20 hectare site recently, 10 pits. So, it really varies a lot. Landscape and soil type are the big things there. This is someone, the cattle. So the trees are 18 months there. That's at my site. Now, weed control wise, so important. There's no cultivation done there at all. So it's pretty fortunate. It's one of those red Krasnozem soils, gradational clay soils, so very well drained. All you need to do there is a bit of weed control. If you could mulch there quite simply too. On that site, I could have actually got the silage feeder out, whatever you call it, on the back of my tractor, and just run it out, just left a trail of silage behind me and planted into that. I've done that, but I didn't get quite as good an effect as strict weed control because I had to keep coming back, keep mulching, to be quite frank, I didn't have time. And the trees, If I had done that on that site, I wouldn't have had cattle in those trees for after 3 years. Yes.
Is your site frost prone?
No, but it's very exposed, so very windy.
So that would, frost and wind would be another parameter to manage, in a way, when you come to species.
Yeah, absolutely. In species selection, there is a lot of things to think about, and frost is certainly one of them. Where's my mate that had the lerps? There he is over there, sorry. So this is a lerps, this is another insect. This is actually a project not far from here at Devil's River. Anyone know what Devil's River is? So just on UT Creek Road near Alexandra. This site had a lot of challenges. We did soil pits over this site. Oh, you'll love this. So this is a 200 acre site, so 80 hectares. Only 20 hectares fit the bill. Yeah, so we did a lot of soil pits on this site, probably 25, 30 soil pits to work it out. But you know what? The guy is thrilled. You know, I said to him, it said to him when I went out there, he told me on the phone, he said, my site's steep and it's rocky. I said, okay. And we rocked up, had a look at it, and I just had a 2-hour look and I said, you know, your ability to plant, there'll be less than half of this will be suitable for forestry. And he goes, oh, okay, all right. No worries, I'm glad I know. And so we did the soil pits to confirm, and it was actually a quarter. And we put these in. Now, it's obviously been fairly dry over summer. The only green thing on this site were those trees. Those trees were looking absolutely fantastic for quite some time. But then the cries of mallee beetles came in. Am I going to spray that? No, I'm not going to spray them. It's a matter of keeping the health of those trees right, and I'll get the odd insect attack, sure. There's quite a bit of remnant veg on the site, which will help me a bit as well, but I'm not really concerned. So don't be too reactive to pest problems. Actually try to be proactive, and then you can be, if you're looking after the health of your trees, you can be pretty comfortable, pretty confident that your trees will grow through that and not lose much growth. Deer, big problem around here, particularly next to Lake Eildon National Park, where I was for this. And what do you do about deer? Well, I could talk about deer. This is a whole presentation on deer. It's become, you know, through my career, deer is probably the fastest growing pest issue I've ever seen. It's now #1 issue on most sites that I deal with. Cheapest way that I find to deal with deer is when you're dealing with browsing pests, you don't just look at one thing. You don't just throw a guard on your tree and expect that to do the job. Because what it'll do, it'll help for a little while. But on this particular site, where 20 hectares looked fantastic, I remember ringing the landowner early December 2019, said, trees are great, I'll do a survival assessment in March, but at this early stage, you're looking fantastic. Good, Clinton, you're doing a great job, well done. I'll meet you out there in January and we'll have a bit of a look around. Yeah, no worries, it's all looking great. So, I meet him at his shed, we drive up, and I felt like a liar. Rocked out to his site, most of it's looking good, then we get to the back corner. Bush on both sides. I swear, I'm telling you, look, I looked through my photos, the trees were here, they were here. But in 4 weeks, the trees have gone from just growing nuts, this high, to this big. Probably 3/4 of them were there, still, but the deer had just gone completely nuts because it was a dry period, they'd moved out. Oh, mate, my credibility is on the line big time. And so I said to him, look, we already had a plan for doing this if deer got to be an issue. We had it all lined up. And it was, with deer, and this will probably offend some people, with deer, I don't care if a deer come into a plantation when they're old, when it's old. I don't care if they're coming in the trees at 3, 4, 5 years of age. They'll rub on some trees and so forth. But the only thing we could do was, in that site, we guarded every tree. Significant cost. So this is the cheapest guarding orientation that I know that's effective. So two thick bamboo stakes. We had everything on hand, so we were able to do it fairly quickly, and we guarded each tree. That adds basically doubles your establishment cost right there, every tree for that section, right? And I said to Sam, look, Sam, we're going to need to do some shooting as well. That's the only other way you're going to get this tree up. I understand if you don't want to shoot. If we don't want to do some culling, we've got to write this off now. So make your choice, because no point in us guarding this site and not actually looking after the deer population as well. Because the guards help, but they'll just rip into pieces eventually. And you see Clinton, it's fairly significant. It's 3 hectares. You know, it's 15% of the project. We'll go ahead, we'll do what you want us to do. And you know what? A year later, we're good. It's only 70% stocked. We didn't do any replanting, but the trees that are there held up. That must be my time to finish. That's very nice of you, Tony, to arrange that. And I'm actually done. We're done.
I think to myself, what a wonderful